Alrighty, guys, good afternoon again. Welcome to class. I have a very special friend here. I've been fortunate enough, I've been listening to him probably for coming up on 5 years now, I think. Um, his name is Matt Locke. If you listen to any type of radio that doesn't involve music around Fort Wayne, you've probably heard the name before at least once or twice. He is an entrepreneur. So I really think that the advice and experience that he can bring to the section that we're talking about can really shed light on different aspects compared to some of the other videos that you've been watching in the last couple of weeks before and after iStep or whatever it's called these days. I'm not really sure. So Matt, good afternoon. Welcome. How you guys doing today?
Doing good. How are you, sir?
Can't complain. Why don't you go ahead and tell them a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Well, it's a long story. I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. I don't know if you go by Cliff Notes anymore. I'm out of the loop too with iStep and Cliff Notes, but do a national radio show called the Matt Locke Show. Been an entrepreneur my entire life. I've owned several businesses throughout my life. I've been a recruiter, and now I speak for a living. So, like you said, if you've been around the Fort Wayne area and you listen to News Talk 1190 WOWO, you're probably very familiar with my voice. Hopefully some are, to be quite honest. I don't know. I was very young when I started listening to WOWO, 15, and I don't know if that's the case anymore. I didn't have digital media players or Apple Music or Pandora or any of those things. So if you listen to anything talk radio, you're going to have heard of me at least once, I guess.
Awesome. Very nice. Very nice. Diving in, the questions that I sent you was a condensed version. Overall, the students submitted probably somewhere in the ballpark of about 230.
Wow.
When it was all said and done. So what I did was I pulled some of mine that I wanted to ask and then some of theirs that seemed to be in the realm of similar to each other.
Okay.
When it's all said and done. I want to ask you first off, did any of them jump out to you initially when you were looking over them? I know your background still can range as a recruiter, so you've kind of been in this field before.
Yes. Well, I think the one that always stood out to me and the one that people always ask me about was always dressed for success.
Okay.
In one of the questions I think you had in there was, is it important for me to dress professionally, how I look? Why would that matter? It's probably that was probably the question that stood out the most.
Okay. So we can go ahead and start there. Having it pulled up here, how does the potential candidate's attire affect or play into the interviewer's decision?
Well, I think it plays a lot. I think it's very crucial. As I always told my candidates, because I recruited for years and years and years, you want to dress for success. You wouldn't show up if you're going to interview for, let's say, an IT position or somewhere where you're going to be dealing with people or you're going to be leading anybody. You want to have that appearance. You want to have the appearance of not only professionalism, but it's amazing to think, and my grandfather told me this a long, long time ago, always make sure your shoes are shined. And I always said, Grandpa, why in the world would I worry about your shoe? Why would I worry about my shoes? He says, I'm going to tell you, Matthew, if you're too lazy not to shine your shoes, they're probably not going to hire you.
Oh,
good words of advice from a gentleman that went through World War II.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, I can actually appreciate that. I got dinged for an interview probably 10 years ago that I had a nice white pair of shoes. And I went to the interview because it was the shoes that I had, and the interviewer actually called me out on it, guys. So
it's really weird, but I find myself after all of that looking at people's shoes. It's one of those deals, and I get it as long as they're somewhat business attire. They don't have to be leather. They could be other material, because nowadays I think the professional dress code has changed a little bit over time, but everybody knows what a nice pair of shoes look like. You wouldn't show up in a pair of tennis shoes.
Right.
And once again, I've told people before, hey, if you don't have a suit would be preferable. Show up in a suit, nice button-down shirt and a tie. But if you don't have that, a pair of khakis or Dockers and a dress shirt with a blazer is always a good choice. And if you don't have that, then at least show up with a shirt and tie, if nothing else. And I mean, in today, you can't judge a book by its cover,
Right.
and you shouldn't, but it's imperative to look the part when you show up to interview for an important position.
Awesome. Very good. Very good. When you have been, I've known a couple of the businesses that you've been in the last couple of years. Um, when you've been kind of I don't want to say at the top, but kind of in like a hiring position for those specific companies, what kind of training do you look for versus on the job training for new hires?
Well, it's changed over the years. So back when I first started, I'll give a twofold answer here.
Okay.
Back when I first started, I was always looking for experience. Like, were you in the Boy Scouts? Were you an Eagle Scout? That always laid some. That was experience I really liked. Did you have any military background? Did you serve our country? That's always experience that you like. And then what I really like to see was jobs that fell in line with what you were interviewing for. Did you have any internships? Did you do anything in your line of work that would say, hey, look at me, hire me, I can do this because I've done that? The things that are really, and the second fold of this is experience. What jobs have you had before? Do these jobs correlate to what you're now interviewing for? Even, in a lot of I used to work with students straight out of college, not a lot out of high school. I would look at their background for education, where they went to school, what majors they had, what course study they took, what groups they belonged to in college, because people don't understand. The biggest thing I always heard from younger people, from college graduates, was, Matt, I don't have a lot of experience. Okay. What did you do in college? What were you, the young business group in college? Did you belong to the English group? Or, if you're applying for, let's say you wanted to be, I don't know, a sports writer. Were you part of the writing group in college? Did you do anything with the book club? Were you part of any groups that would further that experience on down the road? Because you don't have any experience. You don't have any tangible experience. You went and got your education. What'd you do with your education to show me that you wanted to have some experience in this job? Now, like I said, going back to the other parts here, with those with experience, you always look at their background. Like I said, military, you look at, what kind of organizations, groups, certifications, anything like that. So the more education you can get, the better. Now, I'm going to say this with a caveat today, and this is my podcast radio show, conservative views coming out. I think it's tougher. I think it's tougher for young people today to get the actual necessary certifications, education, some of the things out of the college. You have to be very careful about what degrees you're looking at doing, because if you're going to go get, like, let's say let's just say a gender study, what does that do for you? What will that do on down the road? Are there companies hiring nowadays for that kind of stuff? It makes it, you have to pay attention to what you want to do. And look, if your goal is to be a professor, a teacher, whatnot, that may lend itself, but you want to make sure you're studying the right things for what you want to do later on in life.
And that makes sense. One of the things that I talked to the kids about, and it's probably been 2 or 3 weeks, is we were comparing what the cost of college was from the early 1980s compared to today. And I gave my example, which I'm not afraid of. We all make mistakes in life at one point or another. Is they gave, in the early 80s, it was about $800 or so.
Yeah.
To do college. And when I graduated with my associates from a private medical school, I forked out about 42 grand.
Yeah.
For mine. So, and I think that scares a lot of these guys being on the fence about going to college right now or waiting it out.
Well, I think there's a lot, and there's nothing wrong. I'll tell you, there's nothing wrong with going and getting a trade.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with working with your hands. There's nothing wrong with having the pride of ownership. A lot of entrepreneurs start that way. They start with smaller businesses. They start with things that excite them, that, they want to do, that, maybe you want to learn about electricity. as an example. So you want to learn how to wire houses. You want to learn how to do electrical engineering or wiring of big commercial buildings. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being an electrician. There's nothing wrong with being a carpenter. There's nothing wrong with being a plumber. There's nothing wrong with being someone who can fix things. It's needed in society too. My son, who is 19 years old, he said to me, he says, "I don't think college is for me. I'm going to go be a Marine." Okay, well, go do that. And while you're there, get all the certifications you can get, all the training you can get, all the schooling you can get,
Right.
because they're paying for it. So you never want to stop learning.
Oh yeah, definitely. Um, one of the big things that they asked with all of this is, how has coronavirus affected your field of work this year for 2020?
Coronavirus has been, it's crazy because now you don't meet face to face,
Right.
the mask mandates, and depending on what state you're in and what county you're in and all that stuff. My wife's in HR, so I've been watching this unfold, and people will come in for interviews. And I can give you a story. A young man came in for an interview, and their company, all of the people weren't wearing masks. So he came in for the interview. He interviewed with them, and then they offered him the job. And he says, "No, I can't work at a place where you're not going to follow the guidelines of what is mandated by the county." And he turned them down. So
Oh
there's
wow.
a lot of uncertainty on both sides. And you shouldn't be, I'm not saying that you should be that way, but you have to, I think one of the most important things about getting a job and gaining that experience and going through this interview process is it has to be a right fit for you too.
Right.
You can go in, and I hate saying this, but it's true. As human beings, we have the tendency to build things up in our minds. We have the tendency to overvalue or exaggerate what we think corporation XYZ is. Oh man, I grew up, XYZ was the company, everybody worked there, it's amazing. And then you get there and you interview and you're like, that wasn't what I thought. That wasn't what I had in my head. There's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, that job isn't for me.
Right. It's all about perception.
Well,
In
it's
the
all
end.
based on
Yeah.
what you, I mean, here's the thing. We live, and I say this in my radio show, and I'll say it here. You live such a short amount of time. I mean, when you really look at a lifespan of a human being, we're on this earth for 70 to 90 years, and it's gone in a blink of an eye. I'm 46 already. It's crazy. Half my life is gone, and I didn't find my passion until I was 39. Don't find your passion at 39. Okay.
Right.
Go do what I think that's the biggest thing I could tell anybody about, having a job and occupation. Go do what you're passionate about doing, because when you do that, you don't work a day in your life.
No, that's a very good point. I mean, you got to enjoy what you're doing when
Right.
it's all said and done. That jumps down to one of those student questions that they had is, what exactly made you choose your profession? I know you said you started late in life with it. What's the story behind you choosing this?
Well, I'll give you the condensed version. So as a young man, right out of high school, I was drafted to play baseball, and I thought I was going to be a baseball player. I thought I was going to be a professional baseball player. I was going to be this millionaire. I was going to live this great life. I was going to play this game that I loved. And then I had Tommy John surgery of my right elbow, and I no longer could play baseball. So I thought, well, if I'm not going to play baseball, I'm going to write about it. And that's really the crazy thing. So my degree is actually in communications. I have a Bachelor of Arts in communications with an emphasis on journalism. I have my English minor, and I have my high school education certificate to teach. And I student taught for one semester, and I hated it.
Oh, really?
Absolutely did not enjoy it at all. So I stepped back and I said, is this really what I want to do? So I became a sports writer right out of college. I started writing sports in Columbus, Ohio, and I enjoyed it. And like most people my age, I was living life, and I found out that, things weren't that inexpensive. You had to make money to pay the rent and the water and the gas and all the insurance on your car. And then my mom called me after I graduated college and says, "Hey, by the way, you're not on mom and dad's health insurance anymore. Go get your own." So really quickly, I found out that being a sports writer was my dream, but it didn't really pay the bills. So I became a salesperson. I became an entrepreneur. It was really weird. I just had this one moment where I said, I could do this myself. I could take care of myself. And why am I working for a company that, you know, is doing this for me? So I started a business. I started recruiting. I started selling. Next thing I know, I found I was good at it. I was
Hey,
good at talking to people. I was good at communicating with people. I was good at understanding, you know, the jobs and what people were looking for. And I became very successful. And about 7 years ago, I'm jumping through time here, but about 7 years ago, I've always been a salesperson. I've always been very successful, and I've always listened to talk radio. And I looked at my wife and I said, you know, I've got a lot of things to say. I've got a lot of things to say about what's going on with our country and politics and all that stuff. So I spent 6 months training myself on how to do all the sound equipment, how to do the recording equipment, how to do this, how to, you know, to
yeah,
record audio and video and go out there and where do I put it and what do I talk about and how do I fashion a show? And I started this podcast that has become a national radio show. I mean, I literally moved to Texas 3 years ago to be on the Blaze with Glenn Beck, and it's only grown from here. I'm very fortunate that I've had the tools and the drive necessary to push myself forward. And so now I do radio for a living. I talk for a living. I get on here every day and I talk to hundreds of thousands of people about America and politics and patriotism. And, you know, I just, like I said, I would be, my one word of advice would be, don't wait 39 years to follow your dream. Don't do that. It was just, I had a moment where everything clicked into place and it just made sense. Hopefully your moment comes before 39.
right.
But,
And don't let it pass you guys by either, because you won't get a second chance.
well, nowadays I'll tell you, being a younger generation,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's harder. I mean, the era I grew up in, I didn't have social media. You know, I didn't have distractions. I didn't have digital music. I didn't have, you know, 150 television channels. We didn't have a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox. I mean, literally, my entertainment was jumping on my bike and riding down to the churchyard to play a pickup game of basketball with the neighborhood boys. And you came home when the street lights came on. Today, there's so many distractions there, with social media, with just information in general, and with television and video games and all that stuff. I would say, you know, all those are fine. I mean, I love playing video games. My wife and I, to this day, I still play video games. I play about 2 hours a month. That's my kind of little getaway. I'll go in and play some Assassin's Creed or some Major League Baseball or whatnot. It's good, but don't let that get in the way of what you need to do. I mean, you have to have a work ethic. You have to be dedicated. You've got to know what you're working toward, and you have to be diligent about doing it. And you can't be distracted by everything else. And in today's world, it's very easy to be distracted.
No, yeah, that's very true. I want to stay on the social media real quick. I've heard stories through my young adult life so far. Okay, you guys know I'm still in your generation when it's all said and done. I'll be 32 here very soon.
You are young.
Yeah. But the pros and cons of social media. I've heard there's a lot of good things to do with social media, and then there can be a lot of sorry, I'm just going to say it as it is, guys. A lot of damning things.
Yeah, I mean, social media is a double-edged sword. And I deal with it every day with my business, and in particular what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And social media is a platform that can be used very effectively to network. It can be very effective means. I mean, if you look at Facebook, if you look at Twitter, if you look at a Parler, if you look at Instagram, you know, the really crazy thing is it can be a very effective tool. You can reach out to people you wouldn't know. You can get into groups and figure out information. You know, there's a lot of things you can do with it. You also can get in a lot of trouble with it. I mean, things you say on social media, I don't think we're there yet, which I find crazy. And I'm glad I didn't grow up in the social media era, because employers now are starting to look at your social media to see what you're saying, who you're hanging out with, what you're doing. I don't like it, but it's part of this new generation of we're giving ourselves out for everyone to see. Because when you sign on to Twitter, when you sign on to Facebook, Parler, Instagram, Snapchat, I mean, there's a gazillion places you can go for social media now. you're literally giving these platforms the authorization to keep
Mhm.
all your information, which then makes it public. So all these companies have to do is go in and say, okay, what is XYZ? What was this young man saying? What happened here? So it becomes, you want to have the right to free speech. I get it. You want to have the right to believe what you believe, whether it be left, right, center, video. It doesn't matter. You just got to be very careful what you put out there, because employers today may look at that.
Right. And I guess in the end, you just got to be honest about it, right? I
Well,
mean,
and
if
I
they
would be,
ask you
but
about it, you know.
right, I would be. I mean, I'm out of the game a little bit. I haven't recruited in a couple, 2 or 3 years. Like I said, my wife does HR. I don't know what the laws are for asking about social media. I don't know.
Mhm.
But if a company would ask about it, I'd be honest about it. Yep, here it is. Here's what I did, and here's what I meant. If that's the case, I haven't heard a lot of it yet, but I think it's coming.
Oh wow. And that's going to be bad, I think, when we get there, because it may be blown out of proportion to a degree.
Well, and that's the problem. We've lost. And I think one of the most important things to remember is communicate.
Yeah.
Communicate in person. In going through, I want to touch on something here real quick, because I'm an old school guy, and I don't know if that holds up anymore. But you talked about coronavirus, COVID.
Yeah.
Well, now when you go in an interview, are you going to shake somebody's hand? You're worried about germs, what's going on. That's the biggest thing that I've had trouble with. I meet people every day. I deal with advertisers. I deal with
Yeah.
people in businesses. I talk to them. I have meetings. I'm wearing my mask. And the biggest thing that I worry about is when I'm getting ready to leave, do I shake their hand? Thank you for your time, because that's a sign of respect in American culture. That's one of those
Mhm.
old school things. You should look people in the eye. You should be very considerate. You should be respectful. You should answer precisely. And if they ask you to elaborate, you should do so. And when you're done, you should be very respectful. Thank them for their time and leave. But with coronavirus and COVID and everything else, that has really made it an interesting time that we live in. And now a lot of hiring is being done over, Zoom, over all
Mhm.
these deals like we're doing here right now, Zoom, Skype, all of these web conferencing things, because people, don't want to get together. Now, will that end soon? I have no idea. I don't have a crystal ball, but will we ever get back to normal? I mean, people ask me that all the time. Like, Matt, when are we ever going to get back to normal? Well, first of all, what was normal?
Yep.
And secondly, I don't have my crystal ball. I don't know. I mean, my normal is probably different from your normal. And hopefully at some point we'll get back to some kind of semblance of what used to be, I guess.
Yeah, we can only hope. I've been hearing some, and I'm gonna chase a rabbit here for a second, guys. My dad's in healthcare as a nursing home administrator, and he's hoping for next summer that things are going to start to taper down from what he sees from his perspective. So that's kind of what I've been holding on. I'm not holding my breath, because I have a feeling when 2021 gets here, it's going to be like, hey, hold my beer. Let me show you guys how it's done.
Yeah, I have a feeling that next year isn't going to be a let up of this year. And I think we're going to watch as we're coming through. It's obviously flu season right now, November,
Mhm.
December. People are getting sick. You got the coronavirus. It's a very tough situation out there. And I'm sure I'm not, like I said, I'm not actively looking for jobs. I really don't know what the market looks like right now, but I do know that a lot of these jobs you're doing them from home jobs. Like my good friend is a pharmaceutical sales rep. He's used to going out and talking to doctors in doctors' offices and nurses, and he's
Yeah.
selling drugs for different maladies that somebody would have, but yet he's now doing that from his home. So a lot of jobs are being affected by
Hmm.
what's currently happening in society, and that will make life a lot more difficult. So I mean, it's really we're living in some really interesting times. I hope it ends sooner than later, but I don't have a lot of faith that it will.
Right. I know a lot of these guys have, um, about half of them have had their first job already, and
Mhm.
the other half is kind of still hanging out. I know I can probably date you with this. Is like my first job was working at the Georgetown Dollar Theater in Fort Wayne
Wow,
back in the day.
there's no more dollar theaters, I can tell you that.
Yeah, no, unfortunately not. I was kind of bummed when Covington went out, but there's a lot of the stereotypical jobs that would be probably considered like a first time job for
Mhm.
people that are getting I don't want to say pushed under the rug, but they're really being affected by this year because they're usually like those small businesses.
Right.
Um, what and I know it kind of goes to what their preference is, but how could you see like a first time job coming in, like for somebody looking for a job for the first time coming in, on what they could do just to gain experience? Because we all know like that first job, you're there for like 6 months, you kind of know what you want, know what you don't want then.
Right. Well, I can tell you my first job, I was 12. They don't do that anymore. Now
Oh wow.
well, I worked on the hog farm down the road. My grandfather was a dairy farmer. So I
Hmm.
wanted a car, and my dad told me at 12 I was going to buy a car and I have to start working. So I started
Hmm.
cleaning pens at the hog farm down the road. But nowadays, I'm sure first jobs are probably coming around 14, 15, 16, about around driving the car, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, your first job is just that, a job. I mean, you want to make some money, you want to learn some responsibility. I think that first job helps you to understand, authority, being on time and a schedule, working with other people. And you're right, these small businesses now, we're in a sad state of affairs right now
Yeah.
because once again, small businesses are being pushed to the limits because of what's going on right now in the country. um, I don't know a lot of them hiring right now. I mean, I had a lot of friends that flip burgers at McDonald's or Wendy's for their first job. I had a lot of friends that, detasseled corn for their first job. I mean, there's a lot of different things. I think nowadays, once again, I'm kind of glad I'm not a youngster looking for the first job, because I think you have to be creative. You have to be creative in what you're looking for. And in the end, you got to understand, at 16 years of age, you're probably not going to be doing what you want to do the rest of your life.
No.
I mean, you're 16. You want to make money. I mean, listen, we get it. You want to make money. You used to want to go to the movies, and you maybe have a date or take your boyfriend or girlfriend somewhere and, have a burger kind of stuff and, actually have a little money in your pocket. But it's become it's a very interesting time we live in. The jobs are still there. I mean, people are still, working, and they are still there, but we're watching small businesses right now be negatively affected, which affects them.
Right. Um, one of the big questions that I had that I put in here is for post interview, like right before, and back in my day when you used to shake a person's hand at the end of an interview, um, what are some good questions that the potential candidates can ask at the end of the interview?
Well, I always say the best questions to ask are to do your research and find out about what the company is.
Hmm.
You want to ask, questions like, okay, so what's a typical day for this job? I'm interviewing for this. What would be a typical day? If they don't explain that to you, sometimes they do. What would be the best things I could work on? What qualities would you like to see from me that would make you want to hire me? It all depends on, what position you're interviewing for.
Hmm.
If you're interviewing, let's say you're interviewing for to be an insurance agent, you know do I have a book of business? What hours should I be holding? How many appointments a week would you expect from me? What should I be doing? Or if you're in any other line, if you're an IT expert, if you're dealing with computers, I mean, you want to ask questions that revolve around the job, and you want to ask questions that you're unclear about. If you go
Hmm.
through an interview and you're talking to the hiring manager and you're feeling good about this, it's something you might want to do, you want to ask questions that help you better understand what you would be doing or what your duties would be doing within that job title.
Hmm.
That's very important. And you should be prepared when you go there, that what the company does, what they produce, what they're looking for, what the job is. And then you just fill in the blanks with the follow-up questions. You fill in the blanks you would have, anything that fell through the cracks that maybe you didn't have a good understanding or didn't understand at all.
That's very good. That's very good. With today's day and age, um, obviously, you and I are in separate generations for the most part when it's all said and done. My generation coming up is, you can definitely, their tattoos are becoming more common with them, piercings are becoming more common. Up until when you stop doing the recruiting, and just really your opinion about it. I mean, how is that perceived by interviewers now?
Well, I would say so. Interviewers are probably my age. I mean, you're looking at management people who are probably, I'd say, mid 50s.
Mhm.
You know, they've worked their way up the ladder, so they're going to be in my generation. I can tell you, ink was frowned upon. You know, now
Right.
discreetly. You know, I know women. You know, they always say um, small tattoos around your ankles, hidden, that kind of stuff. Make sure you're wearing clothing that you know covers it up. Now, I moved to Texas, and it's a completely different world than Indiana. I mean, there's ink everywhere down here. It's really it's a culture shock, but it's
Mhm.
become. I can tell you, it's become more commonplace
Right.
and it's become more of an expression. I would just say my personal response to this is if you're going to have a tattoo, that's your own personal, you know, decision, but keep it to where it's not, you know, in your face, that it's not over the top, you know, that you're not piercings and, you know, because that gives, and I hate to say this, but it's true, it will give some people a perception of you
Right.
and that may be the wrong perception, but the only thing they're seeing is the cover of the book. So I think if you stay tasteful, I don't think ink is a problem like it used to be. I think a lot of hiring managers will overlook that now. You know, once again, I'm going back to my generation and kind
Of
of my
course. Yeah,
deal.
definitely.
Um, I don't think it would bother me, but I'm a pretty open-minded guy. It may bother the next hiring manager. I think it's all on a personal basis. I would just try to keep it discreet if possible. I try to keep it covered up if possible. I wouldn't be ashamed of it by
Mm.
any means of the imagination. There's nothing wrong with, you know, it's your body, you know, and if you want to put a tattoo on, I know a lot of military guys get tattoos. You know, I know that's very prevalent in the armed services. You know, it's a brotherhood thing. It's a rite of passage thing. Same thing with the younger generation. It's the growing up. You know, maybe there's some sentimental value to it. So I wouldn't shy away from it, but I would be cognizant of the fact that I had it
Right.
and do the best I could to not overplay it.
And that makes sense. And they know I have my arms for the most part covered, but when we're in the school, I mean, in the school versus doing Zoom classes all day long, I mean, two different ballparks. But with our attire that the teachers wear, you know, I'm in borderline a suit and tie all day long. So of course everything goes down to my wrists as far as my shirts go. So they stay covered for the most part. But that does make good points with it in the end. Um, what has been your worst interview experience?
Well, I could tell you a lot of so
Oh no.
I could tell you a lot of horror stories.
Right.
The thing I think I go back to the most with an interview, and the thing that I think that I've seen the most out of younger students is the I want to say this kindly, but it's the attitude. It's the way you represent yourself to the person that is interviewing you. You have to be, and I say this, respectful, professional, and that will get you miles ahead. I've had some of my worst interviews where candidates who thought they knew more than me, who wanted to tell me, you know, what they were going to
Wow.
get, who were very, and you would get that. And it happens. I had a
Mhm.
young man interview for a seat position in Iowa one year, and I wasn't interviewing with me. I'd had a great interview with him, very qualified candidate, and he went out to the seat company that I worked for, and he had probably the worst interview I've ever heard. And the interviewing manager called me and he says, I don't know where you got this guy, but don't send him ever again. I'm like, well, walk me through what happened. And
Right.
it's exactly what I said. He demanded to work certain hours, demanded a company vehicle, demanded a salary, demanded you're not in the driver's seat.
Oh
You're
no.
trying. I mean, you need to put in, and this is the thing, and some people will struggle with this. I'm a big personality. It's my makeup. So I struggle with not taking over a conversation. I
Right.
do. And it's one of those things where I've had to work on over my life that God gave me 2 ears and one mouth, and I should listen twice as much as I talk. But I'm good at talking. And I had that problem for the first few times where I'd want to talk more than listen.
Mm-hmm.
And it showed. And I had a hiring manager one time I was young. He says, I'm going to tell you something. You seem like a very nice young man. You seem very knowledgeable and you seem like you know what you're doing, but you have to pull back. Your personality is way too big and you talk too much. And you got to pull that back just a little bit because you're really bogarting the conversation. And they may not know who Humphrey Bogart is, but that's all right. But the
Guys,
thing
look up
is,
Humphrey Bogart.
yeah. You don't want to bogart a conversation. There's learning something today. But really what you want to do is you want to, I go back to the days before even me, they told you children should be seen and not heard. You should only talk when spoken to. And I will tell you in an interview, that's probably good advice. Only speak when you've been spoken to. When you've been asked a question, answer it fully and with all of the information you have, and then be done. No sense in rambling because like me, I want to
Mm-hmm.
talk because I believe I can talk you into liking me. I mean, that's probably where all this comes from. But in the end, the interviewer, they might be interviewing 3 or 4 other people that day. They want to get these interviews done because they got to run a business. They got to do other stuff. They got to manage people. Time is valuable. They want to get in. They want to find out about you. They want to find out what your personality is. So don't be afraid to show off that personality by any means of the imagination.
Mm-hmm.
But you should try to be concise. You should try to be, very, respectful and get your point out and move on. Don't act like you know more. Don't act like you are a know-it-all. That doesn't play well in any interviewing situation.
Right. No, of course. Um, one of the interesting things that I've seen, and a lot of my students have pointed this out because I've had them work on doing like job searches, how it is today, monster.com, Indeed. I tend to lean more towards Indeed just because I think that it's more of a compact everything, like a one-stop shop, at least in my opinion. Um, the idea of college degree versus high school diploma came up, and I told the students that it's like I went to college late. I started family, got married before I went to college to really get my degree and settle into what I'm doing today. Um, and when I told him this, I told him like, look at what master's degrees are that people are offering on Indeed. And we did it in class. Like they're only offering $15 an hour for master's degrees. And I thought that was a really interesting point to make that really pushed back to what you were saying earlier about like trades, because trades are falling by the wayside greatly. The 12, 16, 18-month certificates
Mm-hmm.
that where is yours? Because I know you said your bachelor's is with journalism.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you stand really looking back? If you were to do it again, would you go for more of a trade when you went to college, or would you have stuck with the journalism aspect?
I wouldn't have changed what I did. I mean, I know some trades. I
Mm-hmm.
grew up in a house where my grandfather could fix everything. My father was a mechanic. I grew up mechanically inclined.
Right.
I've done manual labor. I mean, geez, I've worked on a golf course. I've done a bunch of stuff where it requires that I, use my back and my muscles to do things.
Yep.
I've always wanted, and the thing with me, I've always wanted to be in a profession where I am speaking, so that fell into the communication realm. Now, I would do some things differently. The funny thing is, I probably didn't need as much education as I got, because I
Mm-hmm.
think I probably could have done this with the same amount of education I got in college. And I'm not saying that's a good, bad, or ugly thing. I've learned more. I will be quite honest with you. I've learned more out of college than I ever did in, with
Oh yeah.
studying and doing the radio and in researching and teaching myself how to learn this stuff about history and politics and America and all that stuff. But, I wouldn't change, what I did. And I'll say it, college is for some people. It's not for all people. Some people are wired differently. You have to know yourself and what you want to do. But I will say one thing. You should never stop learning. Seriously, should never, ever, ever, ever stop learning. I've learned more than I've ever learned outside of college just by reading, by studying, by researching. Learning is always good. Education is always very good.
Very nice. Very nice. I want to leave this on this. I'm going to give you like the final 60, 70 seconds just to, if you could tell them anything in the class, what would it be?
Well, I would say just be yourself. I mean, in the end, you got to know what makes you passionate. You have to, there's something that that makes you want to excel, that you feel good about, that you feel strong about. And when you feel that way, you're confident about it. You want to be confident about what you do, what you know, because you're going to continue to learn. You're going to continue to do the things you need to do to grow. You're going to continue to do the things to do a great job because you're confident and you like doing what you're doing. So at least know what you want to do. And like I said before, when you find something that's a passion, you don't ever work a day in your life.
No, very, uh, all good points tonight. Well, Matt, I do want to thank you for taking the time. I know the students appreciate it greatly as well.